on the second last topic of the subject, and like I said, next week we're going to look at some troubleshooting practices, and obviously that's going to be a mainly theory one, maybe a bit of what's a description of what we need to do, but pretty much you, as of this point, this published desktop is not part of the assignment. It's just an alternative. So if you remember, we looked at instant clones, didn't we? Okay, as the way of deploying a full desktop to the client. Okay, so that was obviously hosted on the virtualization environment in the vSphere on the ESXi servers, and that's fine. That's when people need a full desktop with everything for themselves as a desktop replacement. Okay, what if they don't need a full desktop? That's the question, right? What if you're working in a call center? Okay, Roman? So obviously there's environments where there's all sorts of requirements, okay? So when someone's working, doing like all the normal jobs, maybe they need a full desktop. But what if their job is just to work on in an environment where they're on a call center and they're using a few apps and email and all those kind of stuff, right? Do they need a full desktop? That's the question, isn't it? What if they don't need a full desktop? Because I can imagine that if you're working on a call center, you only need a few different apps running, and maybe a bit like, let's say, the Optus call center or Telstra call center or Vodafone, okay? But they just have to look up the client details. They have to, maybe look at their account. Maybe they have to reset their password. Maybe they have to change some details. Okay, I'm talking about the typical call center that you call up if you have problems with your phone, for example, okay? They probably have to check their email. They probably have to do some other basic stuff. In that situation, do they need a full desktop for themselves? Probably the reason is not, okay? Because they're not there to play games. They're not there to do complex apps. They're just there to take calls and to interact with the database that's got the customer details. So in that situation, maybe the instant clones or the full desktop experience they're getting through the vCenter, vSphere, as the instant clone desktops is not required. Maybe what they need to do is, last week where we talked about the remote desktop service host. So we're going to look at Horizon Publish Desktop, which basically takes that Horizon, the remote desktop service host and extends it. Remember we had the applications from the host? This week we're going to add a desktop instance from the host. So what does that mean? You're probably thinking, right? That means basically through the Horizon client, how we logged in and we can see the desktops and we can see the applications like we did last week. What you're going to be seeing, let me see if I can open up the worksheet so that you can visualize this. What we're going to be able to see is, let me go right to the end. Do we have it? Yes. All right, so if we look at this, we've got our, eventually, can you see that? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, so if you remember, we got this instant clone, that's the full desktop, and we got these apps that we have used last week, but then we're gonna have this published desktops. Okay, so obviously we've used the same group of users so they have access to all of it, but essentially if we had this special group, which is the call center staff, maybe they only have entitlements for this published desktop. So when they click, so they're still using the Horizon client, and they still could be anywhere in the world, okay, including people working from home, okay, and they just have to make sure, obviously, they have to use this client to connect to our Horizon server, okay. So we talked about how we need that universal access gateway, right? UAG, if you remember, right at the start, but we obviously in our worksheets we've eliminated that because of the fact you can see we've got so many virtual machines, okay? So we've eliminated that, and obviously we've tried to narrow the focus as if it was on a single LAN. But essentially, the same way that you can access these desktops remotely, you can access everything here remotely. Everything here that you see in this thing remotely. So that could be overseas, internet, at home, whatever. So if I was working for we had people who were working in the call center only, So maybe their entitlements is that published desktop plus maybe some apps they need to access. And they double click on this, they will launch an instance of the operating system that's running on the remote desktop server on here. Okay, so do you get it? So it's, instead of a virtual machine that's inside here, it's an instance of this OS. You follow me, Roman? You look like a little bit puzzled. It's an instance. It's like a multi-user operating system, right? Okay, so basically same operating system, multi-user, meaning that a lot of people can connect to this remote disk service host at the same time, and they have their own login, own instance. But they're essentially using the same operating system. Okay, so therefore it's not the same as the instant clones where they have the full desktop that we had down here, because they're not running their own instant clone full desktop. They're running a session on the same server. Okay, so if you want to think about that, that means if one of them, if they have the powers, of course, if they delete a file on the C drive, it's gone for everyone. Okay, because they're sharing the same platform. They just have their own session. Yep.
So far it seems like it's the same thing, but like many users connect to one. Desktop, but how is it different functionality-wise?
Oh, well, it's definitely different in the sense that this instant clone is a separate virtual machine for each person. Okay, all right. So separate VM that's running on ESXi. So if they delete this Windows System 32 folder, for example, it only affects their own VM, no one else's. You understand?
Yeah.
Okay, so on this one, they're sharing the same operating system with everyone, but they just have their own connection to it.
Yeah, but how do they get like limited experience with it? Like you mentioned that they have only certain specialized apps, for example.
Yeah. Like I'm saying, this is obviously, like I said, this is a full desktop. This is the situation where they don't need a full desktop. Okay, so they don't need a dedicated virtual machine for their purposes. They would just have a desktop environment, and they would go in and they would just run their apps, which are lightweight. Okay, and basically they are accessing not a different virtual machine. They are accessing this server. They are just a different instance of this server. Okay, I think this is very hard for you to understand, isn't it? It's like it's, if you want to think about it, if you want to make it really, really simple, it's like me having a remote desktop session from this computer, and another person have another separate remote desktop session to the same computer elsewhere. Yes. Yeah. Well, the user experience will be different because if their client, if they have the power, let's say they decide to shut down the computer, they will shut down for everyone. Obviously, you wouldn't let that happen, right? Yeah.
Alex, you mentioned that, for example, they can't play games like this.
Yeah, it's because you got to understand this is the same physical computer. Okay, it's the same physical computer here. Okay, it's a server grade operating system. Okay, so basically they're all sharing the same resources, not necessarily the same as a VMware have virtual machine. They're sharing the same physical resources in that sense, but if I actually use a resource on this server, it's going to definitely affect every other user because it's considered the same computer. You can't limit one person to have a certain amount of resource and another person have a different amount of resource. So therefore, it's usually for less demanding apps, less demanding use of the computer. So simplified. It's a cut down version of the operating system, if you want to think of it. Okay. It's instead of having a separate virtual machine with all the things and they can do anything they like that without affecting anyone else. The fact is they're sharing the same core operating system. They just have different instances. So if they decide to do something that's going to affect the whole computer, it will affect the whole computer, including anyone else who's using that service as well. Another instance of it. Okay? All right, okay. All right, so basically that's what we're talking about today. So today our objective is to look at the Horizon Architect for desktop sessions. We're going to look at some design consideration for these published desktops, and we're going to configure the Horizon desktop sessions, and we're going to talk about the load balancing and custom scripts, because obviously we're looking at server farms, the idea of server farms. So now practice is only one remote desktop service host, right? But essentially it could be multiple remote desktop server hosts. You could have some for these published desktops. You could have others for the applications that we're talking about. And then we're going to look at some tasks that you need to do if that's common for managing these farms and application service pools, desktop pools. Sorry, that should be desktop pools, not application pools. So delivering published desktop sessions with Horizon. So previously we've looked at basically using it for just publishing the applications like last week. Now we focus on publishing the desktop sessions, which are not full virtual desktops. That's the key thing. Key difference is that VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, which is that instant clones in the vSphere ESXi vSphere environment, and SBC, which is server-based computing. One is a full desktop delivery, okay? But that may not suit everything. Like I mentioned, what if you have a group of users who just are using simple apps, simple, lightweight meaning not highly demanding of resources, and they don't need a full desktop. They could just share the instances, right? Just a terminal. Remember, like a bit like the idea of the mainframe and different people having terminals to it, okay? So basically published desktops is delivered through the Microsoft Remote Desktop Service and brokered means managed by the Horizon Client Connection, Horizon Connection Server. And it's basically with this, it simplifies user access and reduce infrastructure needs. So let's be honest truth. Honest truth is that I don't need Horizon Connection Server to install Microsoft Remote Desktop Services. Okay, I don't need Connection Server at all. I don't need Horizon at all. But that just means each user has to now go to Remote Desktop and connect to it. Okay. With Connection Server, I go to the same Connection Server client, I log in, and I get the instant clones if I want to. I get the published desktop if I want to. I get the apps or if I want to, and I get it all in one area. So I don't. Yeah. So it's easier. It's for simpler user access, user management, and obviously it reduces other requirements. Okay. So the advantages. That's what the advantages are. It's a simplified end user experience. Like we said, it's a streamlined management because it's the same way. So we don't have to look at entitlements in any other way besides the way we've been doing it. We don't have to look at delivering the apps, delivering the different desktops in any different way except for the way we've been doing it. So that's what it is. So the infrastructure requirements. There's no significant changes to the backend, Horizon's backend infrastructure. We just need additional Microsoft Remote Desktop Service host servers. So obviously, the number of how many remote desktop service hosts do we need? Depends on how many desktop we want to publish, how many apps we want to do, and so forth. How many clients we need to have. So it's like anything. So you adjust how many of this do we need based on how many requirements, how many users, and so forth. So the key adjustments we need to do is we just need to install the Horizon client onto the remote desktop host server, just like we did last week. So we install on the server instead of the virtual desktop machines. The Horizon Desktop Service host server serves as the resource delivering the desktop sessions. Okay, key thing here. This is called sessions. That's called virtual desktop machine instances. Okay, so even the names, the wording is a little bit different. the process, the overview. So basically, we have the connection, the Horizon connection server communicates with the Horizon agent, which is on the remote desktop host server. So the agent is a bit of software that allows communication and management. The remote desktop service farm, we create a remote desktop service farm and a desktop pool from it. And then basically we configure the entitlements so that the right users get the right things. And then basically when the user actually double clicks on it through the Horizon client, and they deliver a connection server using the normal display protocol, which is the VMware Blast remote desktop protocol or PC over IP, whichever one you want to choose. And they get a desktop. But that desktop is actually running on the Horizon server farm. Okay, so we, on our computer, on an end device, should I say, end device, this doesn't have to be a full computer. It could be our mobile device, it could be our tablet, it could be anything, okay? Thin client. So basically we authenticate ourselves, okay? Because it's all connected to Active Directory. The Horizon server is sort of communicating Active Directory to, and this could be the replica, so for load balancing and failover. And then we're gonna access the desktop pools. These desktop pools, if it's a published desktop, we're going to double click on it from a user point of view, and then that's going to trigger a session from the remote desktop host and the client to be interactive. And basically all of this is communicating so the user sees a window just like the other one, Instant Clone, but in this case it's a session connecting to the remote desktop server host. Key design considerations. So farms and desktop pools. So farms are a group of remote desktop host servers with shared resources for the desktop session. So basically all these are what's going to provide the resources. Farms are created, farms create desktop pools where users access their sessions. What about resource allocation? So avoid overcommitting virtual CPUs to physical CPUs. This risks poor performance. So by the way, you notice that this server farm, these could be physical servers, or they could be virtualized on your virtualization environment as well, just like any other server, okay? But obviously in our worksheet, we didn't want to make it so complicated, so we just made them as if they were physical servers, okay? But the honest truth is that you could do as virtualization, that's what we're talking about here. High consolidation levels are achieved by over-allocating users to cores, not CPUs to cores. Do not include memory over-allocation in your design. So because obviously the amount of memory you are going to have is very important. The farm design and sizing, consider use cases like GPU requirements. Not all servers need GPU cards due to costs. Create separate farms and pools for those ones that need GPU enabled. So let's say someone, for some reason, I know it's probably not very good reason to have need GPU enabled resources, but some workloads require GPU. All right, so with the advent of AI and machine learning and that kind of stuff, they're more reliant on GPU resources now. We could also balance CPU memory and disk resources based on the application workload demands. Key design considerations, say resource considerations for sessions. Beyond CPU and memory, the count, we need to count for either the protocols, PC over IP, or the Blast Microsoft VMware Blast Extreme. Connection requires multiple sessions. Published applications and desktops each count as an individual session, individual connection. So for example, this person who's actually launching a published desktop gets one connection for desktop pool. Then if he launches the PowerPoint from that published apps, it's another connection for the PowerPoint. And if it's launching Word as well, it's another one for the Word. And if look at this, there's Excel dev, it's another connection. So if we talk about that if this potentially this person could be using 4 connections simultaneously. And you have to make sure that you enable enough connections. Publish applications and desktops each count as individual session. Session example, user connects, yeah, so that's what we said. Then in this case, there's a total of 3, and that's free connections or sessions per user. So just think about that when you think about this. Sizing and connection limits. So impact on capacity, the more connections per user reduces obviously how many users you can support at one time. Example, if all users use free connection, the capacity effectively is reduced by 1/3. Let's say you had 150 connections configured, and each one uses free connections, then obviously you can only have 50 users. So the connection server limits, so servers with 4 CPU cores and 64 gigs of RAM supports a maximum of 150 connections per server. Okay, so that's when you got to have that second server, second connection server, and third and fourth potentially. The next steps include configuring the horizon for published desktop sessions. You begin with the remote desktop service server, a role setup, and we did that last week, didn't we? All right, so we configure the server role, we install the Horizon agent, we then go to the Horizon server, and we configure the Horizon farm, we configure the Horizon desktop pool, and then we use assigned desktops to the end user for the entitlements. And you'll see that today we won't be doing this or this because we did that last week. We're trying to save on the amount of servers, so we've just going to use the same server again. What about load balancing? So obviously, if we have multiple servers, then we should have multiple. We should be able to load balance across the three. So in this example, you can see that that's 1, that's 2, that's 3. So obviously, if we had 3 connections and let's say they were all connected to the same physical server, and then two are left not used, then that seems like a waste, doesn't it? And what if they're overloaded? How can we spread the balance across? That's what we're talking about with the load balancing. So there's custom scripts, utilization monitoring in Horizon. We can configure alternative to threshold load balancing. We can use custom scripts to monitor CPU and memory utilization. Example of these scripts for CPU and memory are included with the Horizon agent. It's found in this location. The setup process, we enable VMware View Script Host Service, and it's installed. When we install the agent, it's installed onto the server by default, but it's disabled. We just have to go into the service and enable it like any other service. Second, we apply the service on the remote desktop service host server within the Horizon published desktop farm. And then the next step is to enable the service on the remote desktop server host server. And basically, if you look at this picture, it's like any other service. Its default is disabled. We just have to enable it, and we make it startup automatic, and that's the first step. Yeah, so that's what that's describing. Then we can configure the regedit, and we can use these scripts. So this is the regedit location. So registry editor, that's what regedit is. And in here we can configure the scripts to run automatically and so forth. What about managing of server farms and application pools? So some of the tasks you may need to do is add more farms, edit existing farms, delete the farms or pools. More commands. If there's more commands, if you click this button, you will see several menu options from the drop-down list, and this will allow you to disable the farm, enable the farm, disable provisioning, which stops new servers from being created for automated farms. So remember last week we talked about stateless RDSH, so remote desktop service host. Remember how we could launch more RDS hosts in the virtual environment, just like we will launch instant clones. So that is the best way to do this. Okay, so that obviously comes in with the load balancing, doesn't it? The more instances we need, because we're doing more and more work, we can launch more and more of these stateless RDS, or remote desktop service host virtual machines. All right, so I'm not sure why I've got 29 slides when this is pretty much it. So delivering delivering the published desktop sessions. We design and architecture include the sizing, installation and configuration of the RDSH host server role, infrastructure preparation, preparation for the desktop session delivery. Then we configure the horizon elements, the farm, the desktop pools, and any load balancing. And then we obviously perform any management tasks as required. So it's a short one. Now that's the end of the presentation. Like I said, to do your assignment 1, you don't need this. You don't need next week's topic either. So if you're struggling to finish that right now, I would suggest you focus on finishing off the assignment, okay?